A common dilemma in art that I think is not talked about enough is the massive gap that is between observational drawing and imaginative drawing. You'll find many artists that can do exceptional photocopies, yet are barely able to draw a stick figure when left to their own devices. Even though I never got to the exceptional level, I too found myself stuck in this situation for the past few years. And the first thing I thought for a way out was reference rotations. Due to being so inexperienced, I didn't realize how big of a skill this was, and I also have never been the smartest. So I've been attempting to put this little practice idea of mine into a structure since 2022. I finally had my triumph during this now old study, and since then have been doing it daily for the past 100 and more days, which has resulted in me being comfortably able to draw any pose in any angle, like the ones you saw on the thumbnail, or even something like this. I genuinely believe this daily practice coupled with the initial study completely changed the way I approach drawing for the better. And in this video, I want to explain how you can rotate anything to your heart's content for various different purposes. Before we get started with the practices, I need to summarize some basic principles that are absolutely required to understand how we are rotating objects. I'll get the obvious out of the way. We're utilizing boxes. The reason for this is that boxes are the most basic form that have sharp corners, which makes it easy to discern whether it's correctly in perspective or not. The second thing we're utilizing are perfect circles around the boxes. Why? Because if you rotate any rectangle enough times, it's going to make up a circle. It's going to be the circumference we are rotating in. With the circles, there are 3 different directions we can rotate a box in. So you need to be able to draw an approximate circle in perspective. Don't fret it. Mine are always wonky and most likely not even 75% correct. They still work just good enough. There isn't much to practice it with other than just drawing it a bunch of times. Maybe you'll find practicing it inside rectangles easier. If your box is in a cube, the longer the side, the bigger the arc is going to be. As long as you remember this, you'll be fine. If you want a more in-depth explanation, watch this video. I learned it from there too. So I talked about all these boring things like boxes and circles, but where are the objects? How will the boxes help you draw them? Well, for angular objects, the answer is clear. For non-angular objects like bodies, we are adding one more boring thing: ellipses. So now, let's take a look at the cylinder. Since our box was a cube, this is roughly a perfect circle in perspective. However, for cylinders, the proportions of the ellipse don't matter and are relative to the object it's representing. How to measure their correctness is that the shortest and the longest radius on each side must be on the same line that's going towards the vanishing points. I'm not a math guy, but these work good enough for drawing purposes. Every part of this cylinder is the same width as these top and bottom circles. If you try to showcase them, you'll see that they get thinner as it gets closer to the horizon line, so much so that one of them just becomes a straight line. A cylinder like this is close enough for some parts of the body, like the arms, legs, and the neck. But for details and more complex forms, we will need to modify our cylinder. There are 3 things we can do to these ellipses to change the shape of the cylinder: resize, rotate, relocate. You can pick and combine them however need be, and the more in-between ellipses you add, the more detail you will be able to showcase. This might remind you of the coiling technique used for foreshortening. I've never tried it myself, but this is the principle behind why coiling works. Everything is an ellipse, in a box, in a circle. You can think of this method as some sort of 2D wood carving, or maybe Play-Doh. So let's get the basic cylinder back on from a different perspective. And I need it to be longer, so I'll first make the initial circle smaller, then make the bottom circle even more smaller. Now if you connect these, we have some sort of a cut cone form. And if I were to add this little ellipse here, wow, that's a kneecap. Suddenly the cut cone has become an upper leg. But you might be like, this isn't enough detail for me. Okay, now let's either squash or cut and sand the cylinder we have. Use whichever name makes more sense for you, and add a little secondary cylinder next to it, modified in the same manner. Oh my god, are those muscles? Is this anatomy? I can't believe my eyes. Sorry for that, I don't really have any excuses. It sounded funnier in my head, but you can get as complex with it as you want. I've never drawn the ellipses myself. Usually, I think just the boxes and the basic cylinders will be enough. This is the logic behind them. Now that we got the principles out of the way, let's look at how I've been practicing them and some other ways I thought of. Because just because you know the principles, well, at least for me, just because I learned the principles didn't mean that I was able to adhere to them at command. All of the practices I mentioned will be done using these cubes. These are correct enough for drawing. What that means is that they might not be mathematically correct or even have the borders vanished with the same points, but there aren't any glaring mistakes, which is what we're mostly supposed to go for when drawing. So just download them from the link in the description. They'll be in a read-only Discord server because Google likes to munch on big blueberries. Why we are using these cubes is so that 1. We can use them to randomly pick different perspectives. 2. So we don't have to bother with making perspective grids every single time. There's enough variety that the in-between perspectives will only need some eyeballing. Starting with my own daily practice, the main objective as always was to get rid of any decision-making process. I don't enjoy having to scroll on Pinterest for 30 minutes before I get to put down a single line. And if I were to pick the cubes myself, I will probably continue picking the same 4 I enjoy and not improve ever. Every session I get 5 randomly picked cubes and arrange them in this order. If you want a TMI about the cube picking process, you can read the discarded part from the screen because I yapped for too long. Once we get the cubes, therefore the perspective grids, we need the poses. At the start I was using a darker sketch because I thought they'd be better since they're real photos, but I felt that the pose variety there was too limited for this practice. Since then I replaced it with the pose of the day from the Pose Maniacs website. This is nicer because now the references are going to be on a relatively flat angle. Now, if you don't know already, every pose on Pose Maniacs is a 3D model. Knowing this, you might be inclined to go into the pose and turn it around, taking a real good look at it. And I strongly recommend against doing that. My reason is that reading intricate 3D information from a 2D image is a skill in itself that can mostly be practiced only passively. You might think, I don't care about that, but the drawings themselves are in 2D too. If you can't read 3D information from an image that's perfectly in perspective, you can't read it from your own drawing. And then you won't know what you did right or wrong. You're still going to feel something is wrong. You just won't have the tools to differentiate the reason. I hope I don't sound too full of myself because it's not like I have mastered these either. You can take the warm-up approach where you look at the 3D model a few sessions before you hard lock yourself into the 2D images. Or maybe you do something I've never done and look at the 3D model until you have memorized it and completely get it out of your view as you do the rotations. Well, you can take the warm-up approach to literally anything really. For the rotation part, you'll need a mannequin. You can come up with your own because there are so many ways to go about it, but I like to keep it simple. I just have these boxes for the head, torso, and the pelvis. I use cylinders for the arms and the legs because they tend to be easier, but if I'm having trouble with them, I turn them back into boxes as well. After this, we'll use the principles I just explained to rotate each part of the body. You don't have to bother with drawing the boxes extremely correct if it takes you a long time like it does for me. But keep in mind that the more correct your boxes are, the more true your rotated pose will be to the reference, and the easier it will be to draw the flesh on top. I consider every reference image to be in this cube, which I will call the eye level cube. When I was new to this, I would look for a body part on the reference that was aligned with the eye level cube, and I'd start with drawing it in the new cubes, then rotate everything else relative to that. Nowadays, I map out the 3-directional rotations, one direction at a time, for the major parts like the torso and the pelvis, either on the canvas or in my mind, and use that as a step-by-step guide. If you have used Magic Poser before, you will probably be reminded of it here. Some other times, there isn't much to rotate with each body part, but the whole body is rotated. That's when I put the body in yet another box. They put me in a box full of boxes. You'll see that I draw a bunch of arrows, and that is because apparently I suck at figuring out my lefts and rights. Very humbling experience figuring that out. At the start, these used to take me 15 minutes, but I have seen upwards of 45 minutes and even 1 hour. A big part of it that I'm just distracted. You can see that I don't polish any more than I did before. So I'm going to estimate that 5 rotations take around 30 minutes as a safe reference. You can do this daily like me, do less or more poses in each section, do it weekly or monthly, in whatever schedule you decide on. Any amount of this practice will help you improve, though the more the merrier. If you are doing it daily too, you might not want to put too much effort into the flesh part like me, because it's bound to get boring real fast. I just scribble some stuff and try to get it done as fast as possible, because even though I really like this practice, I'd rather be done with it sooner than later. If you want to improve the flesh drawings, that's where in-depth anatomy studies will be needed. So we rotated all these poses, but how do we check if they're correct? Well, once you're finished, you can go into the pose in Posmaniacs and turn the 3D model around to get the approximate angle. There's even a bounding box you can toggle on to help you with it. If your reference wasn't from Posmaniacs, use Magic Poser to recreate it. Me personally, I don't do this. I know it'd be more progress if I did. I just find it boring and I'm too stubborn. Usually I can see the mistakes, I just don't have the skills yet. For those, I just accept my fate. And if I can't see it, then that's too bad. My pose rotations I think are nice, though they're nowhere near correct enough. Nor am I comfortable enough doing them. But I have the utmost confidence that eventually, if I stick with it, a day will come when rotating anything will be a breeze to me. I can feel and see myself improving, and it just feels so rewarding for once, not only for repeating it copious amounts of times. Like, these look nice, right? I would have never been able to do any of these if not for the boxes. I hope I'm not getting too ahead of myself, but I think I have visual proof that this practice is working. And this all happened in the span of a few months. It just feels so nice to finally have something concrete in my hands. I think I get to say that. However, this isn't a relay race. Success is relative. Seeing all these, you might question if you're just going to be stuck drawing boxes forever. And the answer is obviously no. As you get your reps, you will start being able to draw without relying on boxes too. First, maybe it's for the simple poses and angles. That's simple poses from hard angles, hard poses from hard angles, more complicated objects, so on and so forth. The math will engrave itself into your intuition over time. How long this takes will depend on the person. I know for sure it'll take me years though. That is why I'm doing it daily. If you try this out and it seems too much for you at the moment, I will suggest rotating neutral standing bodies in proportional boxes. This is what I did in the study I mentioned briefly. I'd like to share the boxes for those too, but they are way too incorrect. For once, they aren't actually proportionally 8:2:1. I traced the initial boxes from Magic Poser because I couldn't be bothered to measure them. This is how you measure them correctly. After you have the initial boxes, you can rotate them by using the slice circles method. You can either make the boxes yourself or wait for me to make them, which might take a month or two or even longer, but definitely one day, because I want to redraw them once I've done anatomy. And don't worry if they look ugly. Mine looked atrocious, yet it still helped me tremendously. After this, you can try some sort of a cooler standing pose that's still in a proportional box. This is the one I used. I'll put the link in the description. Just don't go in and take screenshots for every angle to draw from. That's just a more elaborate version of observational drawing. You need to rotate it yourself with the mannequin boxes. You can have the 6 side views as a reference at the start. If this too is too much, practice observational drawing and cylinders in boxes. I do these every day too. Some other ways you can use this cube rotation practice is 1. Rotate any photo you like. This is like a level up to sketching from Pinterest. 2. The poses in Pose Maniacs are true practical and might not be the best for illustrations. So maybe you can get fashion poses to rotate and even add a character in too. 3. You can of course use it for inorganic objects too. Cars, buildings, household items. Bodies happen to be the thing I'm mostly interested in at the moment. However, if you're rotating a street from a photo, maybe instead of fitting the photo inside the cubes, think of the cubes as a camera in the middle of that street. If you try to fit the photo inside the cubes, there's going to be a need for so much information that is not given by the photo. 4. If you don't want to bother with drawing, you can just go straight in with shapes and paint. Though for more sensitive forms like the face, I would still suggest at least a rough sketch, because pushing through this, hoping to get to this point, takes some guts, and I don't think I myself will have it most days. Your experience may differ as I am speaking about it with only one attempt to my name. Obviously, you will never have it rotated perfectly, but the goal is to make consistent mistakes that it still looks like the same person. Mine, I'd say, ended up looking like definitely a person of all time. I think it's clear how this trains imaginative drawing, but I want to say it out loud just in case. So let's think of 2 similar situations. We have 2 artists that aren't familiar with swimming poses at all. One is an artist drawing a comic book and they have a one-off swimming scene. What they can do is find a reference, and since they have mastered this, they can just draw it in any angle they need for the panel. Though this will be less taxing because it's a one-off scene, they don't have to bother with recreating the pose in a 3D pose app to get the exact angle. The other one is an artist that's making a whole comic book about swimming. They'll need to draw so many panels with swimming poses that recreating them in 3D is out of the options. Here, what I can do is study people swimming, make an infographic of their movements for different types of swimming, either memorize it or keep it as a reference on the side. And since they have already mastered rotating anything in perspective, they can save so much energy and time by going straight into drawing. Of course, this is all assuming that someone that draws enjoys drawing more than tweaking circular parameters. If you don't mind that and can afford the time, you can just use Magic Poser or any alternatives. That is still something I see myself using in the future. If the imaginary situations aren't convincing enough, I can show you a recent example from me. One day I was doing observational drawings for fun, and this dress obviously made me think of picnics, therefore jumping rope. I forgot to draw it before I got started, but this was roughly the image of the jumping rope pose I had in mind. This is very boring, right? So what I did was use the boxes and draw it from a still classic but much cooler angle. And I think the result looks really good. This is how all this boring rotation practice helps you with imaginative drawing. Once you know how to put and rotate anything in perspective, all you need is the information. How does someone move while doing the X act? What happens if they're young, but lethargic, but old, but muscular, but injured? There's so much you can do. So yeah, get rotated. Someone searched that on YouTube and got to my video. And someone else searched these and got to my video, which makes me very glad I got the feed video out of the way early on. And this is a bit unrelated, but I really wish Pose Maniacs would add a hard mode for the timed figure drawing, where they have all these angles, because after a while you end up memorizing everything, and adding new camera angles is much more easier than adding new poses.